And is this not loud enough? Is that what you're talking about? Does it need to come up? Volume? Can everybody hear? Okay. Really glad to have you joining us this morning. I'm going to give you a little heads up. One of the things that you're going to be doing in the next 45 minutes is periodically turning and chatting with somebody next to you about what we're talking about. So if you're not next to somebody, maybe you find yourself somebody to talk to, you need to introduce yourself, now's the time. And people are drifting in, probably with coffee and bagels. All right. Well, welcome. My name is Jocelyn Scott. I have been the Women's Ministry Director here at Stonehill for the last 2 months. Just getting started and learning this culture and really looking forward to being a part of what the Lord's been doing here. This is going to be the first Sunday school class that I'm teaching here, so, if I break any inviolable norms, you'll have to let me know as I go. I'm going to be co-teaching this class with Lindsay Luciano, who's not here this week. She and her family are away. And so we're going to get started together while she is doing things with her family. Next week she'll come back and get us started on the beginning of the book. But today we're going to do an overview of the book of Deuteronomy and do some context information, some introduction, make sure that we all know what's happening. So I want to start by talking about where we're starting. My question for you, which is on the notes, what impressions are you coming in with? As you think about the book of Deuteronomy, if a new believer were to ask you, what is Deuteronomy about? What would you say? Another point where you can think about it is, what is your sense of how interesting or approachable or applicable this book is? I would love to know what our beginning point is. So find somebody nearby, take about a minute and chat about this. What's your starting point? What impressions are you coming in with? And that can be intimidating. What can make it challenging? Yes?
I think some of the things feel very specific to a certain culture, a certain time period, while others are easily universal. Some of them kind of the cleanse of Christian order. How does this apply?
Yeah, so some of it, it's really clear to see this can apply through the ages. Others, you're like, is this just for them? It's hard to know how exactly do I apply this in the 21st century, right? Yeah. Anything else? What other challenges? What would keep you from saying, oh, I'm going to go study Deuteronomy because that'll be easy? Yes? The length. It's a long book, right? Got a lot of chapters. Yep. Yes?
Often not stories. Stories often short ones.
Yeah. And we're coming out of a lot of narrative. Yeah. The rest of the Pentateuch, the rest of the first 5 books, there is quite a bit of narrative in there, and there's less of that in here. So it's a little bit more challenging or weak, right? Anything else? Just get all the hard things right out there. Okay. Well, here's the question then. Why press through the difficulties? If those things make it hard, what makes it worth it? And I would submit to you that there are many things, but 2 of them we're going to hit this morning. One is it's an investment in our understanding of the Word. If you are interested in knowing more about the Bible and specifically about the Old Testament, then Deuteronomy is a very strategic investment of your time. Got a couple of quotes here. Daniel Block, who's one of the premier evangelical scholars of Deuteronomy, says, Deuteronomy provides the theological base for almost the entire Old Testament and the paradigm for much of its literary style. And John Scott Wright said, the book of Deuteronomy constitutes the theological core of the Old Testament. It's often referred to as the hub around which the entire Old Testament revolves. So if you're going to spend time studying an Old Testament book, Deuteronomy gives you a lot of bang for your buck. It has a tremendous amount of influence on the rest of the Old Testament canon. Okay, so a really wise investment that way. And the other thing that it gives us is fuel for our own personal and corporate growth. And it will help us to grow, make us into the people that God is helping us to become. And it does that in a bunch of different ways. One of the things it can do is deepen our understanding of God's character. As we go through this book, we're going to see that he reveals a lot about who he is in the process of this book unfolding. We're going to find that it sharpens our personal and corporate ethics. Right? The law does not apply to us exactly the same way. We relate to it differently than the Israelites did, but every word of it is going to tell us things that are helpful about who God is, what his character is like, what he values, and how he calls us to relate to him and to one another. And we're going to find challenging things in there, so it can sharpen our ethics. And the other thing is that it clarifies our vision of Jesus Christ. If Deuteronomy is the shadow, the reality is Jesus, right? It's pointing in his direction. He is, if there's law in Deuteronomy, and there is, he is the fulfiller of that law. Jesus is the embodiment of the love relationship that we're going to see God lay out in this book. He is the climax of the story that it's telling. And overall, we're going to get this picture in this book of this people who must obey the law and can't obey the law. And the result of that is that it casts this long shadow in the direction of the cross, right? Because they have a problem and we have a problem. And it shows us more about who Jesus is and what he accomplished. And so Deuteronomy will help to enrich your understanding of Jesus' character, his mission, his person. All of that will be wrapped up in this book. All right. So, this is a very small podium. I'm going to just knock things off of it throughout the morning, if that's all right. Okay, so the approach we're going to take in here, we do not have time to do a deep dive into every piece of Deuteronomy. It would take easily a year to do that. We have 8 weeks. And so mostly what we're going to do is a high-level overview of each section of this book. We're going to talk about tools for reading and understanding this kind of literature as we go through. And we're going to emphasize heart issues and the gospel and practical application. Right? That's our intent. And today, we're going to do an introduction to the book as a whole, and we're going to take a deep dive into just a couple of passages that might be strategic as you think about Deuteronomy overall. My goal here is to set you up study Deuteronomy over the next 8 weeks. Now, how much initiative you take with that outside of this room is entirely up to you. How much margin you have, how excited you are about this. But the goal is to equip you to be able to study Deuteronomy, right? So we're going to start out maybe by praying. That feels like it would be helpful. So let me do that real fast. Father, we thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. We thank you for this word. We thank you for the richness and complexity of the word that you have given us. We thank you for the opportunity to sit and marinate in it together and to see who you are more clearly as a result. We pray that you would fill us with your spirit, that you would help us to see what you have for us in here, that you would help us to dig our roots down deep into who you are, and that we will be changed as a result of spending time in Deuteronomy together. We pray these things in your name. Amen. Okay, so we're going to start out by getting our bearings. There is a drawing in your notes there, and there are notes up at the front if anybody doesn't have them. If we think of the Bible as one overarching story, like one long story from beginning to end, it's tempting to think of it as disparate pieces, right? Because they do feel so different as you go through. But the fact is, it's one unified story. I think this is the language that the Bible Project uses. One unified story that leads to Jesus. Right? That's the story of the Bible. It's a cohesive narrative, and God is the main character. The plot is his pursuit of this rebellious, beloved people. And so that, from beginning to end, is the story. This little arch that you see is something that a seminary professor drew in a class that I was in that has been useful for me. It's meant to sort of represent a timeline, a story arc. So you've got a cross at the climax of it. That's not hard to figure out, right? What do the two trees mean? Anybody? Any ideas? Okay, which one is the tree of life? Yes, the one on this side is the tree of life, right? And which tree could this be here? Yes, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So you've got the beginning of Genesis here, right? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and you've got a story that stretches through centuries, millennia, and lands in the final chapter of Revelation with the tree of life, right? So this is meant to indicate that this is one unified story. This is a helpful tool for me because it enables me to look at wherever I'm studying in Scripture and figure out how do I anchor myself in this story? Where am I in the narrative, right? And where we are in Deuteronomy is right about there. Right about there. So we're at the end of the Pentateuch. We know that. So it's the first 5 books of the Pentateuch, right? We're at the end of that. And we're at this, actually a huge moment in the narrative. In this story of God's rescue of his rebellious people is this massively important moment in redemptive history because the Israelites are about to cross into the promised land. Like this has been discussion since Genesis and problem and crisis. And right now they're standing at the threshold of entering into the promised land. God is about to make good on the promises that he made to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Right? So we're like right on the brink of this really important moment in redemptive history. Where it falls in the biblical flow. So if you look at the little flow chart there at the bottom, I was an English teacher. Flow charts are not really my thing, so the graphics there leave a little to be desired. But the idea is that when you look at Genesis to Numbers, what you see in there is history and theology and law, among other things. We get history, we get the story of this people who have grown from this one guy, right, into this wandering band of Israelites. They have been dramatically rescued from Egypt by this great and loving God. There was a covenant established, and then they screwed things up and have wandered around in the wilderness for 40 years. All of that narrative is in the Pentateuch. There's theology. We learn about who God is, what his character is like. He reveals himself to them little by little in the story. And then law. There are periods, especially in Leviticus and pieces of Numbers and in Exodus, where the law is laid out. God says, this is how you are to behave, right? So all of that happens in the first 4 books. And then we get into Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy takes all of that and first of all kind of crystallizes it. They're about to head into the promised land, and Moses is like, look, this is the truth that you have been given, and kind of puts it all in a package for them to hear. He codifies it. They're actually going to put a piece of it next to to a record of it next to the Ark of the Covenant. And then he applies it, as Rosalie pointed out, to this new generation, right? These people who are about to step into the Promised Land are not largely the same people who were at Sinai or who were crossing the Red Sea. The point of wandering around in the wilderness is that that generation has died. These are their children. And so Moses is taking all of these things and he's applying it to this new generation. Okay, so he gives them this information. This is what happened. This is what's true. This is how you live. And then Deuteronomy becomes kind of the engine that drives the rest of the New Testament, Old Testament, and goes into the New Testament as well. So we're watching the people live out their response to what Moses is giving them. So when you go into Kings and Chronicles and you see the kings succeed or fail, the litmus test for their success or failure is the stuff that's in Deuteronomy. When you get into the Psalms and you see the psalmists exploring the beauty and the struggle of this covenant relationship, these are all dynamics that are laid out in Deuteronomy. When you see the prophets stand in judgment over the people for their faithfulness or lack thereof, those standards are rooted in Deuteronomy. And you see that God is faithful to those covenant promises over and over again. I'm going to ask my husband if he would mind getting me just a glass of water. Okay. So we live downstream of those stories, but we are still part of that same narrative. And that's a dynamic that we need to keep in mind. Okay, so we get to the circles. And we talked a little bit about this already. When you think about the context of Deuteronomy, it is vastly different from ours in many, many ways, right? So you've got the ancient Near East, and you've got Princeton in the 21st century. They are wildly different. And that difference is important because if we take the ideas in Deuteronomy and we just lay them over our own culture without taking any of that difference into account, it's actually kind of dangerous. We're going to find ourselves in a place where we're doing things that are not honoring to the Lord because they don't apply to us in the same way. So we need to be careful about that. At the same time, though, there's a great deal of overlap. There are things that are true of our context, our culture, our lives that are the same as what they were experiencing in the ancient Near East when this was all happening. Right? So what might go in there? I'll give you one thing. We serve the same God, right? Yahweh is the same today as he was when Deuteronomy was written. What else? What else goes in that overlap? What's the same about our time and place in people as about the ancient Near East? Yes, they struggle with being obedient. I mean, I struggle with being obedient. I'm guessing we all do. And so, rebellious people are in that overlap. What else? What else is the same? Yeah, God's promises have not changed. Anybody else? Yep, God's love.
We're still sinners.
Yes. Yes. And we're in the same redemption story, right? So all of those pieces follow. So there are going to be major elements of this that very much apply to us as we go through. It's just going to be important for us to keep this dynamic in mind. As we're looking at a piece of Deuteronomy, what in here is different about the context that affects its relevance to us, and what is exactly the same? How can we find what is relevant? There is a lot of richness in here that is deeply relevant. I think one thing I don't want you to hear is that truth is relative. It is not. Truth is truth, but it applies in different contexts in different ways sometimes. So that'll be some of what we explore as we go through. Okay. A couple of words about genre. What is Deuteronomy? Wrap this up. sort of misunderstanding of the word found in chapter 17. What it gives you the impression of sometimes is that what's happening in Deuteronomy is that Moses is giving either the same law again, which makes it redundant, or a new law that kind of cancels out the first one, which makes it a replacement. It is neither of those things. That's not what's happening here. The Hebrew title of this book is actually Devarim, which is the first word of the book, and it means these are the words. And honestly, I think it's a better title. I think it's a better description of what's happening in here. There are a couple of ways you can think about this, actually 3, I'm going to give you. As you think about where Deuteronomy fits as a genre, one thing you can think of it as is a sermon series. These are Moses' last words, right? Moses doesn't get to go into the promised land. And so these are going to be the last things that he shares with the children of Israel before they head in and he goes to be with the Lord as they head on. He's going to be explaining and expounding the history and the law, and he's going to be exhorting the people toward obedience. So you can think of it as a sermon series. You can also think of it as a royal treaty. Now this gets a lot of treatment in the scholarly work about Deuteronomy. The book follows the form of a particular ancient Near East treaty called a suzerain-vassal treaty. I think I have some details about that on the handout there. The suzerain-vassal treaty was an agreement between a great king and a subordinate partner who has come under his protection. Right? It would have been a form that the people were familiar with in their cultural context. And so there's a specific structure to that, and Deuteronomy follows it pretty carefully. It records the history of their interactions as part of this covenant relationship. It lays out the rules for living in harmony with this great king, and it delineates blessings that will come with obedience and curses that will come with rebellion. So just keep that in mind. There's a lot to be said about that. We don't have really time to unpack it this morning, but we'll talk about it a little bit more as we go. But you can think of it as this royal treaty. And then the last thing there is a covenant renewal document, because that's what's happening here. The covenant is being renewed as they go into the next, their new land. You'll find there are a lot of places here where Moses identifies this generation with the generation that has died off in the wilderness, where he says to them, you were at Sinai, God says this to you. And they might have been like, no, we weren't actually, I was slothful. But what's happening is that he's identifying them with the previous generation and honestly all the rest of the generations to follow. This is the covenant that applies to all of God's people through time. You'll also see in chapters 27 and 30, there's going to be a covenant renewal ceremony that they act out, literally, as they go into the new land. Okay, so that is where we're starting. It's a little bit of background, but I'd like to take the rest of our time today to focus on 2 particular passages. And one of them is the first 5 verses. And I pulled those out because they're important. They function as sort of a preamble to the book, but they can also be a little intimidating on first glance. This is kind of like, I love A Tale of Two Cities, but I tell people you have to get through the first 2 chapters. They can be a little slow and confusing, but if you get through them, it's totally worth it. So this beginning is a little bit like that. It's a little intense, a little hard to follow. So I figure what we'll do is we'll pull it apart over the next 10 minutes or so, and then when you go to read, we'll have that all smoothed out and you can kind of head into the rest of the book yourself. So let's take a look at it. Deuteronomy 1, verses 1 through 5. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan in the wilderness, in the Arabah, opposite Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Laban, Hazeroth, and Dizahab. It is 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. In the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses spoke to the people of Israel according to all that the Lord had given him a commandment to them, after he had defeated Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon, and Og, the king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth and in Edrei. Beyond the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moses undertook to explain this law, saying, and then the rest of the book begins. Okay, some of you are like, you lost me at the Arabah. Take a second, turn to somebody next to you, and just talk about what did you pull out of this? What that is helpful about understanding the book did you see in there? Just for 1 minute, and then we'll talk about it. All right, give me a few things that you found. What's in there that's helpful to know? Among all those place names. I did look up how to pronounce them. I'm not sure I did any of them. Thanks. Yeah.
Well, you point out, like, it does give us geographical locations, and it's very clear that that's important for some reason. So it's kind of like, as a reader, you want to be like, well, why is this something I can understand?
Yeah, as it turns out, a lot of those place names are either kind of vague or going to be very hard for us to pinpoint, but it does make it really clear that place is important. Yep. What else?
Another thing I have to say is it's clear that Moses people, it's the Lord that given him the information he was trying to expose.
Yeah.
He was trying to clarify, make clear to the people what the Lord has made clear.
Right. So we get the speaker. These are the words, right? We get the speaker. It's the words of Moses. And we find out who he's speaking to. And then it comes back to the fact that it's Moses speaking in these 5 verses, I think 3 times, right? It kind of sits heavy on that idea. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the timeline is clearly important. You don't see too many things like that tell you how many days' journey it is from one place to another in Scripture, right? So the timeline clearly is important. Yeah, these are all great observations. Let's pull it apart a minute and just look and make sure we're catching everything that's in here. So if we start at the beginning, these are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan in the wilderness, in the Arabah, off opposite Suf, between Paran and Togo, Laban, Hazarah, and Dizahab. So here, let me see these highlights. These are the words. So again, there's the title, right? The Hebrew title, the beginning of the book. That Moses spoke, he's the speaker, we pointed that out, to all Israel. There's his audience. Beyond the Jordan in the wilderness. So if most of the promised land was west of the Jordan, right? They are standing just east of the Jordan in the wilderness. Right? And then you get all those place names that you don't want those to be really, I know they can. Try not to not get stuck in them. And then it says it is 11 days journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. In the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month. All right, so here's that timeline. Also, 2 place names to be aware of as you go through this. This will be really helpful as you read. Horeb, Mount Horeb, is another name for Mount Sinai. All right, this discourse, the Deuteronomy discourse, refers to it as Mount Horeb. But when you see Mount Horeb, think Mount Sinai. So this is where they had their encounter with God, right? In their first covenant ceremony, covenant ratification ceremony, where they got the law, where they got the 10 Commandments, where all the badness went down with the golden calf. Like all of that was Sinai. All right, so think of Sinai when you see Horeb. Kadesh Barnea is where the disaster with the spies happened. Do you remember that from the book of Numbers? So they get to the promised land. They're on the threshold of the promised land. It took them how long to get there? 11 days, right? The first time it was 11 days from Mount Horeb to Kadesh Barnea. They get there, and the people are like, oh, this sure, so they send 12 people, including Joshua and Caleb, or 10, including Joshua and Caleb. They go in, they're like, this land is amazing. The people are very large, but it is amazing. Everyone gets scared, including most of the spies, and they're like, we are not going. Right? So they stand in defiance of God's orders, they disobey, and God is like, now you're going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. You don't get to go. Right? So this is a point of great pain for the Israelites. It's a part of their history that is very painful as they look back on that massive, massive failure. So when you see Kadesh Barnea, think of that. It's like a scar on Israel's history. It's this place of pain and failure. Right? So then it gives us this timeline. 11 days journey, and now we're in the 40th year. So it took them 11 days to get from Sinai to Kadesh Barnea. Everything fell apart, and now it's 40 years later. They've been spending 40 years wandering in the wilderness. All right, so we know that's what's happening. And then Moses spoke to the people of Israel according to all that the Lord had given him, a commandment to them. So we see, again, this is Moses speaking to this audience, and we see what his authority is. The Lord is speaking through him, right? The Lord gave him these words. So now we know not only who is speaking, but where he is getting his content. He's getting it from the Lord. This is an interesting one. After he had defeated Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon, and Og, the king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth and in Edrei. Okay, I read this kind of stuff, and I have to really fight. My brain wants to just kind of like through this whole section. This is also how I watch baseball, so you can commiserate with my husband about that. But this is an important thing that is buried in here a little bit. When you read that he, meaning God, had defeated Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon, and Og, the king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth and in Edrei. What's happening here is that the Israelites have already seen, these things have just happened, right? So they've already seen the Lord is starting to, he's with them in military might in a way that he had stopped empowering them for a while. Like they tried, after the thing with the spies, they were like, no, we get it, we'll go. And so they try to go back into the promised land, and God's like, guys, I told you no. And they get defeated, like demoralizingly. So that's no longer the case, right? They've seen recently, Sihon and Og were both defeated. The Lord is with them as they're standing here now again. And then this last piece, beyond the Jordan in the land of Moab, Moses undertook to explain this law, saying, so they are beyond the Jordan in the land of Moab, and they are once again at the threshold of the promise, right? There were 11 days and a failure, 40 years of wandering, and now they are back at a different entrance to the promised land, but that's where they are. They're right on the edge again. And so it does set up this suspense. Are they going to fail the way that their parents failed, right? So that's where we are. And again, Moses undertook to explain this law. So it emphasizes again, these are Moses' words, but also tells us what his goal is. His goal is to explain, to teach, to expound what's happening. Okay. That is the introduction to the book. And once you get through that and get into what's going to happen next, because this is laid out like that treaty, is he's going to tell some of the story, the covenant history, the things that happened that led up to this moment. But the other thing that I want to look at, because what we're doing today, Lindsay's going to look with us next week at some things in chapters 1 through 11. But today we're talking about an overview, and so I'd like to take our last few minutes and look at one of the passages that is most central to this, not only this book, honestly, but to the faith. So if you look in Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 and 5, you find something known as the Shema. And this is a piece of this book that became an enormous part of what it meant to be one of the children of Israel. Even through today, Orthodox Jews, multiple times a day, recite this piece of scripture, among other things. And you have heard it before, I'm sure. But here it is, it's in your notes. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with with all your soul, and with all your might. All right. Where do you know that one from the New Testament? Anybody? Jesus. Yes. That's always a safe answer. What is the question that he's answering when he references this? Anybody? Yes. What is the greatest commandment? What is the greatest commandment? He's asked by one of the scribes who's actually showing some good faith. He's not just trying to trap him. And he answers with this. He answers, the Lord our God is one. You shall love the Lord your God, this is the piece he quotes, with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. So Jesus highlights this as being absolutely central to what it means to know and love and walk with God, right? So it becomes important in our world as well, not just to the world of Israelites and Jews. So let's take a look at it and think about what it means. There's some discussion. There are people who take a look at that heart and soul and mind and talk about how it sort of makes up all the pieces of a person. You've got the inner man and then the outer man. Well, no, that's not. Yeah, it's the heart and the will and the strength of the body. I really like the explanation that comes from Daniel Block, who I've been listening to his lectures on Deuteronomy, and he's got the most old-timey radio voice. It's quite something. But I've listened to this several times because I really, really like his explanation. And here's what he says. He says you should think of this as concentric circles. The heart, the soul, and the might. And the way he would identify them, and he does some really excellent work with the Hebrew there. The heart is the inner being, he would say. It's the seat of the will, motion, passion, and also thought. Hebrew didn't have a separate word. Biblical Hebrew didn't have a separate word for the mind. All right, so this is the whole inner person. The soul is the whole person, not just the inner person, but the whole person. And so this is all of the self, including the body. This word actually, we translate it soul, but it can be used in Hebrew to refer to a corpse. So it can refer to the physical body as well. And then might. Might is a funny one. This is a common word in the Old Testament, but almost everywhere it's an adverb. It means very. And so all your soul, all your heart, all your very doesn't really work. And so when you go into other languages and look at words that are related to it to figure out what would this mean as a noun, what you get is sort of the idea of the fullness of all of one's resources. And some people use the word muchness to describe this. All of my muchness. Everything that I have, all of my possessions, my time, my talent, my resources, everything in the service of God. All right, so this is what the Israelites were called to. This is the thing that Jesus identifies as the central commandment. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart and all of your soul and all of your might. So I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to explore what does that mean? What does it look like? And so we're going to split this up. If you are in the back 2 rows, you are going to talk to one another for a moment about what it means to love the Lord with all of your heart, all of your inner being. If you're in the middle 2 rows here, you're going to talk about what does it mean to love the Lord with all of your soul, all of your whole person. And the front 2 rows here, you're going to turn and talk about what does it mean for me to love the Lord with all of my might, all of my resources, everything at my disposal. All right, if you are across those rows with somebody, that's okay, just pick one of those things. But here's some things I would ask you to consider. What does it actually look like if a person is doing this? What does their life look like if they are loving the Lord with all of their heart, with all of their soul, with all of their might? How might you know if you are not doing this? And then maybe even if this resonates more, where are some places where this is hard for people, for you? So explore the idea a little bit. What does it mean? What does life look like as we pursue these things? So take maybe 2 minutes and chat about that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I So we got
So let's hear from you then. Those of you who are in the back, what did you discuss about what it means to love the Lord with all of your inner being, all of your heart?
But I should have gone and asked her.
Thoughts? I've diminished the pool of people from which I can draw here, so if anybody has spoken up yet, might need to.
What's the orientation of your life?
Okay, what's the orientation of your life? Which way are you pointed? Yeah, where is your heart directed? That's a really interesting way to think about it. What else?
It struck me that you included thought in there as part of the heart instead of always kept them separate.
Yeah.
And that's part of what it's called.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? The idea that we do have a tendency to separate the mind and the heart, but they are very much connected in this idea. Yeah, that there's an integratedness to that, consistency there. How about the soul? Your whole person? What'd you come up with?
Two things. Like one, it's kind of the decisions of your everyday, like your choices that you make, like you do things with your body, like you go out and do things, so those decisions you make every day. But then someone sort of brought up the idea of like roles, like what roles do you play? If you're a parent, if you're a worker, if you're whatever, volunteer, what roles do you play and how are those roles, like your identity almost, like how are those roles do you
That's so great. Yeah, the idea that you do things with your body, so you're doing things that honor God, but then also what are the roles that you play in your life? How does your identity settle into what places, and how in those places do you honor God and love Him? Yeah, as a parent, as an employee, as a daughter, all of those things. Yeah. Okay, anybody else on the soul? Whole person?
Somewhere kind of thought your body is consecrated to the Lord.
Yeah, your body is consecrated to the Lord. Feels like Romans 12, right? Yeah, offer yourselves like your bodies as a living sacrifice. Yep. Okay, how about all of my muchness, my might? What'd you come up with?
It basically is how you live your life, what your actions are, how you relate to other people.
Yeah, and there is, I mean, if that's the outer circle, right, there's a wholeness to it, like all of the things, all that I have, all that I am, yeah, and how do I use all of that in service to the Lord? Does that capture it? Okay. Anybody else?
just the thought that it's, God's calling us to a harmony inside and outside, of integration. So, but the reality is we're fighting all the time. But His goal is that there's a in unity, that what we are on the inside and what we do on the outside is consistent.
Yeah, and a beautiful picture. There is the consistency that seems to be going for it, and a beautiful picture. We're made in His image, right? Like He is whole and consistent inside. Obviously, the outside is not the same, but that's the idea. That everything that He is consistent. There is no variation within Him, and that's what He's calling us toward. And so here's the thing. You look at Deuteronomy, and yes, it's full of laws, and yes, it has blessings and curses, and yes, the language is hard to follow sometimes, and there are a zillion place names. But this is the beating heart of this book. This is the trajectory that all of it is on. And this is what we want, right? This is what we are after. This kind of intimate, integrated, holistic, and a full, intimate love relationship with God. That is what we're desiring, and that is the direction that Deuteronomy is pointing. And so it's my prayer that as we go through this over the next 8 weeks, that we'll have a chance to see that grow in our lives. A couple of things about the rest of the week. If you would like to, if you have a couple of hours to spare, maybe later this afternoon, and you want to sit, you could read through the whole book. It takes the average adult reader about 2 hours to get through it. If you'd like to focus on chapters 1 through 11, you can do that in maybe a half hour or a little more. I actually have a handout up here if you're interested in it. This breaks up chapters 1 through 11 into 5 different days of reading. It's got a little preview of each section, and then a place to write down some observations, some things that you see as you go through. It is not a requirement, but you are welcome to take, I think I'm on the piano, you're welcome to take one of those as you go. Other thing I might ask you to consider is the possibility of memorizing these verses, chapter 6, verses 4 to 5. I'm thinking on them for the week. I wrote the word "here" on my hand this morning. I have a tendency to write things that I want to continue to think about right there, at that spot. So that as I go through the day, I see it and I'm reminded of it. What does it mean for me? The passage starts, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." What does it mean for me to hear, to really listen? So that's the thing that I want to turn over in my mind today. I am really excited about where this is headed, about what we're going to learn. I'm excited to get Lindsay back here next week and jump into what she's got for us. But let me pray to finish this up. Father, we desire to hear, to listen, to obey, and we desire to love you with all that we are, with our inner being, with our whole body, with all of our resources. We know that we fall short of this, and we thank you for the story of your people who did that to you. We pray that you would help us to know what it means to lean into becoming like you in this way. And we pray that you would instill a love for you deeply in our hearts as we study together. We pray these things in your name. Amen. Thank you.
Work.